The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
And live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, this is the Studio 21 Podcast. And here is your host, David Garofalo.
Welcome, everybody, to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line. Let me help bring your marketing and advertising to the 21st century. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting since 2010. And by doing so, I've created a six-figure income from it. I'm here to help you on your way to do the same. Today's podcast: podcasters must train their listeners like dogs. Okay, this is a 21-minute podcast or less, so let's start the clock. And here we go. Podcasters must train their listeners like dogs. And to become a great at any profession, you need the proper training. To become great at podcasting, there's nothing better than training, which is learning and practicing for success, learning and practicing over and over again. You need training, and you need to train others like your listeners. If you're doing a podcast, you need to train your listeners. Hopefully, if you've been listening to this podcast, the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, I taught you something to help you begin your podcast. If you've already begun, we've helped you improve it, or at the very least, we taught you something. So hopefully that's what we did. I think we did. If you're not a first-timer here, if you've listened to the show before, welcome back, and thank you for tuning in. If you're here again, that means you are trainable. You've been trained. You've been trained to come back because I trained you to return. That's what I tried to do. You might not have known it, but I tried to do it, and if you're back, I think I accomplished it. That's the idea of trying to train the listener to come back. And there's lots of ways to do that, and we're going to get into that. One of the biggest ways to get you to return is teasing. So you listen to an old show, they'll say the last show, and you bit. On the very last show, I teased you during that show. I said something to you for you to look forward to and tune in. On last week's show, I said, treat your listeners like a dog. If you got curious at all about that, treat your listeners like a dog, you came back. That was the idea of it. That's what the tease was there for. I said it to get your attention. Did it work? It did, because you're back. If you're here, you're back, and maybe that's a reason for it. Maybe you don't even know that that's the reason for it, but that could be one of the underlying reasons why you ended up tuning in. What could that possibly be about? Who would want to turn their listener into a dog, treat them like a dog? But to treat like a dog is the training process of it. So trying to find some work into it to try to make you basically not understand what that could be, but be interested enough to come back to it. And if you are back into the show now, you get a treat for showing up, just like you'd be training a dog, right? And the treat is more information, more free information to help you grow as a podcaster, how to begin podcasting if you haven't done it already, and if you did do it already, how to improve your game. If we did deliver to you a treat, some good knowledge, some content, you will be back again. That's how it works, right? That's how it happens with a dog, right? And this is the plan and the theory behind today's podcast of treat your listener, train them like a dog. If you train a dog, you throw the ball. He brings it back, he or she brings it back, and you give them a treat. You do it over and over again, and as you do it over and over again, it gets easier, he gets better, he likes it better, and he does it better, and it's a win-win. The dog likes it better, it's working better for you, and this is what training is all about when it comes to a pet. But your listener isn't a pet, it's a human being, but some of the training is going to work both ways. So some of the training you do with a dog are the essential commands, they call it, which include sit, come, and stay. So how do I say this in a nice way? We actually want you to do the same. So come here, sit down, and listen, and stay listening. That's the idea of training the listener to your podcast. Sit. We want you to sit and listen to the podcast that we do. And you should want that for your listener also. That's what you want them to do. You want them to come each week to your show and listen again. You want them to stay listeners. Listen to the whole show all the way through and don't miss anything. Stay tuned for more shows, including the commercial content, if any, within the show. We all want to grow our listenerships, but we need to keep the ones that we already have as listeners. Love the ones you're with, but train them. Train them to come back. Continue to grow new listeners, but you got to hang on to the ones you have, and you do that through training process of it, giving them a reason to come back over and over. You need to be trained too. You, the podcaster. We all want to keep learning, and there's plenty to learn. Nobody knows it all. It's hard to get new listeners, but it requires training to keep them on board. If you chase a new puppy, it runs away from you. If you chase a new listener, they might run away from you also. But your dog, your buddy, you call him, and he comes running back to you. The same can work for your listeners, but the training must begin from the very beginning. From the very beginning of doing your podcast. But you already started your podcast, so when is the next best time? You're already 10 podcasts deep in. What are you going to do? The second best time to start training your listener is right away, now. The best time to plant a tree would have been 20 years ago. Right now, you'd have shade if you wanted it. You'd have firewood if you needed it. That would have been the best time. But the second best time is today. Plant it today. So plant the seeds today, the training that you need to do for your listeners to keep them coming back. To train your listener, you must be consistent. This show is recorded every Wednesday afternoon. It's a podcast and a vodcast, video on demand, so you can watch it live. Or, which is what most people do, they listen to it on another date. So it's Wednesday afternoon we're recording this. Maybe on your way home from work on Wednesday, that's when you look for it. And when you do look for it, it's there waiting for you. Or Thursday morning, on your way to work, you go on and you know that we're recording on Wednesday. Every Thursday you go to look, and guess what? Like a good boy, like a good girl, like a dog, it's there waiting for you. By being consistent with a treat, which is a free podcast with valuable content that might help you, the listener, and more likely will be consistent to you if it's there for you. And you will be consistent back. You will always look for it if it's consistent to you. It's got to work both ways. You be consistent to the listener will be consistent to you. You be consistent to the dog and give him a treat after he catches the ball and comes back, and he will be trained and be consistent back to you that he'll bring the ball back to you because he knows you're going to be there for him. That's the way consistency works. Your consistency will make them come back. It will become a regular thing. Usually on Wednesdays on my way home, I like to listen to Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, people may say. It becomes a ritual to them that they do it, and we hope this becomes a ritual to you, that each Wednesday on your way home or Thursday on the way to work, that you look, we're there for you, and then you give us a listen, and we're building consistent listeners. All the time while trying to get new ones, but hanging on to the ones that we have. Maybe every Wednesday, if you do your food shopping, on the way, you listen to that. The consistency is every Wednesday you're doing your food shopping. On your way to food shopping, every Wednesday you are choosing to listen to this show if this happens to be your ritual of what it is. If you, the broadcaster, the podcaster, breaks the ritual by not being a good boy or good girl, by not having that content, they might find a new best friend. And that will be somebody else's podcast, a radio station, any kind of other option other than your show. And they may never come back. They may forget about it because you broke the ritual of being there for them. They were there for you. Each and every week they went on to find you, and then all of a sudden you broke the ritual and you're not there for them. It's okay the other way around, but they could go on vacation, they break the ritual, they come back to the ritual after. but it's not okay for you. You can't break the ritual. You got to be there for them no matter what. If you need to tape some shows in advance and then put them on when they're there, I believe that's the difference of success and failure when it comes to growing a listenership. In order to grow a listenership, you can't have them dropping off faster than they're coming on. You got to hang on to the ones. You got to be a good boy and a good girl. Podcasters must train their listeners. So do me a favor, stay there for just 1 minute, and we'll be right back.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a live, working, full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we are back. And today we're talking about podcasters must train their listeners like dogs. And it sounds bad. I don't mean it to sound bad. I meant it to grab your attention, right? But there is some similarities here of what we want to try to accomplish. And it kind of works if you think about it, right? So back to the dog analogy, and let's turn it around. A dog doesn't speak English or any human language, but it can communicate with you. And if you are a pet owner, you know that. They need you to know something. It's called a call to action. They're letting you know that an action has to take place without even speaking the language. And most of the time, it's very simple for you to see. I have a dog. His name is Dean Martin. And he's a chocolate lab, about 12 years old. He's getting older now. And he, not only is he trained a bit that knows to come and sit and, you know, the regular commands that are there, but he actually has trained me. So when he has to go to the bathroom or wants out of the house at that moment, he'll put his face on the coffee table, or if I'm sitting in a chair on my leg, he puts his face down and lets me know in his sign language that I want to go out. And I say, you know, he does it, and I've learned over a short period of time when he started training me that that's what he wants, and he gets it each and every time that he does that. So he has trained me. I understand exactly what he wants, and I have trained him, and he understands exactly what I want. If you're a dog owner, you know that there may be some things that you know within your dog of him that he has trained you to know exactly what he is looking to do at that moment or needs from you when it's time to eat, when it has to go to the bathroom, whatever it's looking for, he'll let you know that. Even when he's sick, when he's worried, when somebody's at the door. Some of these may be subtle and then sometimes very abrupt with a loud bark. Somebody's here, he's letting you know this is it. You can't hear your listener. You're broadcasting to them. This is a one-way conversation. You can't hear them. What you can do is see that they're dropping off, that you're losing listenership, that you're losing the old ones, if that's the case. So you need to do these things in advance and understand that you have to be consistent to them or else they're going to drop off. I'm just letting you know that's the way it is. As a podcaster, you need to get a call to action, and sometimes you need to do that subtly, and sometimes you need to bark it out. You want to tell your listener what to do. You can say it in a soft way and just sneak it around or whatever, or come right out and say, message me, you know, find me on social media, sign up for this, do this. Tell them what you want to do. Sometimes the subtle thing isn't going to catch on. They're not going to understand what you're trying to say. They haven't been properly trained. My dog could put his face on the coffee table if I wasn't home and you were there minding the dog, and you wouldn't have any idea what he's trying to say. Eventually, he would start barking at you probably, and then you would understand, oh my God, this dog is trying to tell me something. So sometimes you're going to need to bark. That's a call to action or a commercial, and we're going to get to that next week. See how I'm teasing you right now? I'm telling you a little something subtly. At the end, I'm going to get a little more into it, but right now I'm subtly sneaking in. That's a call to action or a commercial, which we'll get to next week. That's a tease, a subtle information that's in there, and we'll talk about that next week. We need to train our listeners to do that too, whatever it is. So to wrap it up, be consistent, and they will be consistent to you, your listener, your dog, and your children. Be consistent to them, and they will be consistent to you. Give them a treat. You want them to come back, and if you do that, they will come back. You'll be actually training them. It works for dogs, and it will work for a podcast listener also. Or does it? We'll see if you return next week. These are just some of the reasons why you should train your listeners, and there are a lot more. If you want to tell us more, I'd love to hear them. Message me at the contact us at studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Set up a meeting with me. Let me show you Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, and I'll even buy the coffee. Next week, the most important statement you must add to your podcast, because without it, there's simply no point. That's my 21 minutes or less, and I'm out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.